Okay, so I'm delighted to be speaking today with Rachel Davis. Rachel is the CEO of Armstrong Craven. Welcome, Rachel. Maybe you can say a few words and introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm delighted to be joining you today, Neil. I am CEO of Armstrong Craven, as you said. For those of you that don't know Armstrong Craven, we are a global talent research firm. We've been in operation now for over 30 years. Actually, it was 1990 when we first started out, so
Wow.
pre-LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So huge track record in our field. We work globally, as I said. We specialise in partnering with talent acquisition, talent intelligence, and HR teams, and we provide talent mapping, talent pipelining, talent insights, everything in between. Operating across sector, so big presence in life sciences, in financial services, in tech, in consumer, industrial, as you would imagine. And I think what will hopefully become interesting as we sort of talk through today is we talk about the 3 C's quite a lot when we're partnering with talent acquisition and now latterly TI in particular. The 3 C's are, we are there as an extension for capacity, for capability, and for confidentiality. They're all the scenarios in which an in-house team kind of would hit a barrier in terms of trying to do things directly. And that's where a partner like us, Armstrong Craven, can be there just to give you that extra edge. So
Fabulous.
That's us in a nutshell.
Good. And of course, I know Armstrong Craven pretty well from being a customer, so we can touch on that later. But it's great that you've managed to evolve over the years, and we'll touch on the service offering a little bit later on the call. So I'm really fascinated to delve into. There's a number of listeners we know to this podcast who are very interested in talent insight data. It's really driving pretty much everything we do now. And as I say, I've known Armstrong Craven firsthand, in terms of the results that you can produce. But maybe you can kind of set the scene in terms of, where we're up to in the landscape of, insights, data, and how has it evolved as well? How's that narrative evolved from your side?
I think, like anything involving data at the moment, is accelerating almost exponentially, and there is a real hunger in every part of business for data and then the analytics of that data.
Yeah.
And I think obviously, as we're all hearing, AI, Gen AI is just, if you can accelerate something that's exponential, then that's what's now happening as well. So I think that is sort of having an impact in all sorts of ways. And some of it has been accelerated through the COVID pandemic and so on, which I'll kind of touch on maybe a bit later. But I think one of the things where it's really manifested itself in the TA world, in the HR world, is the increasing prevalence now of talent intelligence as a function internally. So there are talent teams specialised in insight, specialised in data, that aren't the, purely working on HR analytics data, which is still tends to be very much internal data, but actually they're specifically looking at the external market and what's going on, and what are the trends, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that evolution of TI is really since the last 6 years is where it's really taken off. So you're starting to see it creep into every area of talent, and talent in its broadest.
And try and educate the audience a little bit about intelligence versus insights versus data, right? Because some people who might want to move into the space don't really know what the difference is, I guess.
Well, there is a great analogy that Toby Coleshaw uses, and for those of you that don't know Toby, he's been in the TI world for absolutely years. You can look him up on LinkedIn, and he has a great analogy which I cannot now remember in full, but it's to do with knowing that a tomato is a fruit and knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. And I think somewhere along there is the definition, the difference between pure data and actually the insights. Now, I also think there's a lot of semantics.
So what he's saying is that it depends what you're trying to do and what tool you use for Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's so knowledge or data in this sense is knowing a tomato is a fruit.
Okay.
The intelligence or the insight is knowing not to put it into a fruit salad.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference. For me, I always talk about data is there as it's a set of facts.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be interpreted, and it's the so what is the
Yeah.
important thing, because if you can make decisions based on data without actually really understanding what the data is saying and what it means to you individually as a function or an
Yeah.
organization, that's the danger. That's a real danger. So
Good.
I think, that would be the difference. In insights, intelligence, again, there are some schools of thought. I think it's a bit semantic. I think
Right.
they're reasonably interchangeable personally, but I'm sure there are others out there that would say,
but
say
you
otherwise.
and your team have always been very good at asking the why and asking the so what. So yeah. So, as you
critical.
think about, organizations, they're at different stages of this journey, of how to use data, how to use insight, and obviously the intelligence as well. And, but ultimately, we always on these discussions, we would try and look at the value, right? So what value are we trying to create here? And as a talent function along this journey, no matter what your maturity is, how do you think organizations should be defining value when it comes to insights, intelligence, or data?
Well, I was thinking about this, and if you sort of take it a step up to how should organisations value the talent function first of all, I suspect if you pare it right down to its barest components, the talent function is there to ensure the right skills and the right people are in the right places at all times.
Yeah.
And that includes then making sure that you've got access to the right talent that you need. The talent internally is being moved around as agilely as it can be, and obviously to protect and mitigate any risk from a succession planning piece. So they're all your channels of needing the right talent in the right space.
Yeah.
So I think the value that you can put on insights and data, there's all sorts of ways at looking at it. Fundamentally used right, data analytics and insights or intelligence will give you the evidence to make the right decision. And that decision could be anything. But I think it's also making the right decision fast enough. One of the nice projects that we worked on, where there was some really clear kind of feedback that came from it that was really impactful. It was for we do a lot of work in the life sciences sector, and this was for a US biotech based in New York State, and they are a very, very heavily genetics driven business, and you can imagine, whether you're a scientist or not a scientist, the amount of data that is spewed out by genetics. And this is a real issue, actually, even for the MDs, the medics, and the scientists in the business that weren't geneticists.
Yeah.
Actually being able to understand and interpret this data. What on earth is it all about? It's really, really onerous. So actually what they decided and what they realised is they need an interface to make this data digestible and understandable for non-geneticists. And so for the first time, they were needing to hire app developers. They wanted to, create apps so you can get this data digested on a tablet, on an iPhone, so it can be used properly. So we did a lot of work. We do a lot of work with their talent function. And the kind of dawning was, we don't know anything about app developers. We're not tech recruiters. We're not a tech business. We're an R&D life sciences business. So where do they even exist? We think we know, given where we are in the world in New York State, these are going to be from JP Morgan, they're from Goldman Sachs, they're going to be from Google. We don't know how to talk to these guys. We don't know if they're going to be interested. What are we going to do? So we did a project for them that firstly assessed that talent market in New York. Where is the talent? Where are the concentrations? And yes, they're in Manhattan. Yes, they're in trendy warehouse and lofts in Brooklyn and so on. But actually delving right down into the motivations of that talent, and what would it take for them to move, and even because obviously they won't have considered a biotech as a career move. Now, on the one side, we've got our client, the biotech, really used to hiring brilliant people with that overriding message of come and save a life. That's what we're all in this for, right?
Yeah.
Is to come and make drugs, life-changing drugs, life-saving drugs, come and save a life. So we kind of put that to the population. What is your primary motivator? What might be your secondary? There was salary data and all sorts of mobility data collected alongside it. But fundamentally, it turned out that their primary motivation is interesting, I'm going to say sexy tech, cutting edge. That's what they want. It isn't the brand name so much at all. It's knowing that they are getting to play with cutting edge tech, which this biotech could tip. That secondary hook of, and by the way, what do you think about doing this for a company that makes life-saving drugs, was so powerful that actually the feedback, the reason why I'm going with this is the feedback was that cut their time to hire on that program by 18 months.
Wow.
So that is phenomenally impactful because actually you've got 1.5 years now of knowledge share across the business, which is accelerating drug and product discovery. That does way more than just for your share price, right? Which obviously goes up. It is genuinely saving lives.
Yeah.
But that was with the right message layered in the right way. And if they hadn't done that, they would be scrabbling around, wondering why they can't, prize this talent out of their trendy lofts and warehouses. So a nice sort of anecdote of the value.
Absolutely.
That something could,
and it's, the asking the right questions, getting to the right answers fast is obviously going to speed up that process. And, I'm interested just to kind of pivot the conversation, similar theme in terms of, the getting the right insights. I mean, I know from the experiences we've had over the years that you've done some fantastic work in the D&I space over the years, and and you've really excelled at asking the right questions, to get to those answers. But I would like to understand more about, again, the organizations out there are trying to get to the right populations, trying to build a diverse workforce, but struggling to ask the right questions. So, even to get to the starting point to say, okay, what questions do we need to ask in our intelligence or our research in the market in order to accelerate these processes? So I just interested to unpick that a little bit with you, maybe building on the life science analogy, which you've just given, of how organizations are approaching this and maybe some of the mistakes to avoid in the future as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge topic. I'll try and sort of unpick some of the areas. I think the first thing is that when a business is looking at its diversity and the makeup of its workforce, the first thing they do is obviously quantify and measure internally, and that's easy enough to do. The percentage of underrepresented talent, whatever group that might be, whether it's women or ethnicity or whatever. And then there's quite often this kind of, and these are all right things to do, by the way, but then the first step is to, so have we got the right environment, particularly now with, inclusivity and belonging? And it's kind of very inward looking. It's have we got the right network groups and investing very inwardly. When it comes to the hiring piece, there's still way too much of, we'll just slap a metric on it then. We'll just say we want parity on a shortlist or a couple of 2 or more underrepresented candidates on a shortlist. They're still not tying it to the state of the market and what is the talent in that market. And so, genuinely, can you have parity on a shortlist? Actually, that particular area only has 10% women. You're not going to have 50% on the shortlist. So there is that element and understanding of, we do need to know what is out there and where is the talent that we need, where is it located. But that's often where the next kind of mistake can happen, is that organizations will knee-jerk to, and it's brilliant, the talent mapping, which will then identify that talent for you, and they'll go route one straight to try and attract it. And then the missing step is, well, how do we connect this talent? There's a reason why we haven't got it in the first place. So do we understand? Again, it comes down to that primary data. So that's the direct. I always use my hand because I'm old and I'm using the phone, but it's that word of mouth.
Right.
It's the word of mouth, color and depth believe just literally the numbers and the data out there. So yeah, that biggest mistake is just assuming then that having identified people, you can just bring them in without actually understanding, so what are the barriers? What are the lived issues and barriers and challenges that people are experiencing in their careers? Does that apply then to us? What are the motivations? And if often there are pockets of in demand diverse talent, how are we going to, again, just get there first and make sure that our message resonates the best? So doing that layer of primary insight as well to understand that talent before you start to then bring it into your organization means that it is easier to attract and they stay, and then they can progress their career and start really making a change.
I'm intrigued to understand. So, enterprise businesses have the structures in place, sometimes the budget, sometimes the time, right? Maybe not. Some just go, right? And some just say, we need to go and hire these people.
Yeah.
But then you've got the SME market, which might have the budget, doesn't have the time, maybe doesn't have the resources. The example you gave before sounded SME, kind of, but small, but rapidly growing. I don't know if it was or it wasn't, but I mean, that's kind of irrelevant.
Absolutely. Yes, it was.
So I'm just intrigued because, again, our audience is very much, a mixture between enterprise and SME. Would the process to go through this be any different if you're a different size of organization or different levels of resources internally to go about this type of activity, which I think I fully agree with you, it's critical, but they are also very time sensitive as well.
Yeah, I think there is definitely, the sort of the luxury. Often the larger organizations are the global MNCs are the ones that went first with setting up talent intelligence functions. They tend to have the larger pockets because so they will have access to probably more headcount and actually more resources, more data resources. They are still hamstrung to a certain extent when it comes to gathering the primary data, the so what data, as I call it, because they can glean a lot through, candidates and existing employees, but actually being able to go and benchmark yourself against competitors in the market where you can't. If you are a recruiter from company X or a TI expert from company X, your LinkedIn says company X, your email address is company X, you can't phone up company Y and go, how does this work? And why are you doing this?
Exactly.
And what do you think? You just can't do it. So whether you're a large or small organization, definitely that primary piece where you would look to a partner, Armstrong Craven or others like us out there, to be able to obtain those insights. If you're a smaller SME just on this journey, again, having that partnership as you're building the business case can be really important. And there are some areas where you don't need, you kind of know what you're doing and it's fairly steady state. So actually having a full-time headcount for TI is actually not feasible yet in where you are in your, your evolution. So again, knowing that there are partners out there, and I guess the benefit equally of, it goes back to the 3 C's, it's adding that capacity piece is you may, as an in-house function, you may have the luxury of having one or more of the big, products out there on the market. Most businesses, it's LinkedIn TI. Might not be, it might be Talent Neuron, it might be Eightfold, it might be all these other pieces of tech that are knocking around, but you may only have one if you have one. And again, that's where a partner can fill out. So we do quite a lot of work with organizations that say, well, we do use, I'm not going to start naming names now, but we do use this resource, but it just isn't great in APAC. So we can plug the gaps as that external partner. So it's not very different depending whether you're small, medium or large, because there are always the kind of barriers that you would face or the limitations as an internal team.
And we spoke about this before, but in terms of the value and the return, the investment is always very critical. So, I'm a talent leader in an organization. I know we need to do this, right? And I'm trying to sell that to the CHRO. What's some of the kind of the typical scenarios in terms of how you may guide a business in terms of that return investment? Because I think, as you've alluded to, you can either layer up projects, you can do a bigger project in one go. There's multiple access points, of course, to entry, but generally you have to present a business case to that. So maybe talk through, how I, as a talent leader, should be positioning that return investment or that business case internally.
I think, well, so the one thing is it's getting easier because it, as in insights, talent,
Right.
intelligence, data is now a thing. So I think there are lots of examples of businesses that have very, effective TI functions that are measuring, again, measuring ROI in their own sphere. But
Right.
there are lots of case studies out there now. But I also think there will be ample, I'm sure, examples of where a business has run into difficulties in its talent agenda because it didn't have access to data. So it either selected the wrong location for a brand new, offshoring BPO, for example, and then you did it purely on finance and low cost labor and not thinking about the right kind of talent in that location. So there will always be previous examples to draw on, and actually just the urgency of the setting. If it's an investment hire that's kind of driving this case, a bit like the biotech, this was an area they knew nothing about. The what if we don't, or what if we get this wrong, is actually a very impactful argument to be setting something up. And again, if you're starting out, it might just be on a project basis, but you're talking about budgets that are, likely to be smaller than the cost of the executive search to appoint the leader, right? So it's not, in the scheme of things, if you're positioning it correctly with the business leaders, with the stakeholders, it can become a no-brainer because they know they're going to get.
What's interesting, you kind of alluded to it before, the business is becoming more and more involved in some of these discussions and, discussions around, return investment, but more importantly, the value, right? So we need the data to drive our business outcomes and our business performance. Are you finding that beyond TI, you're having more of an impact and a discussion with the business now? Are they finding that data more useful, broader, outside the talent function, or are you finding it's still within very much the confines of the HR or talent?
I would say we definitely are experiencing more of a hunger from the business itself, and I think part of that is probably bandwidth. Part of it is sort of influence and sphere of influence of a TA and or HR team. But I think one thing that's interesting is, particularly for organisations that are changing and growing, and that is actually a lot of businesses across the world, certainly from a changing perspective, there is the pressure to get it right, the pressure from on high, where however high you are in the business, there's always somebody higher than you, or ultimately the shareholders. It's got to be right. So we are doing increasing numbers of projects directly with the business itself. So with the chief procurement officer for their organisation, or with again, actually at the moment, market access, as they're looking to expand, their footprint and get their team size right. That kind of benchmarking of so that. What are our peers doing? But not just, okay, so what's their org structure look like, but why? And actually, as they grew, what were the mistakes and what were the benefits, so that we're not having to make those same mistakes? We need to take this data, we need to take this analysis, and we need to translate it into what does it mean for us, because we don't want to just be, a carbon copy of one of our competitors. So that's something really interesting. And then what we do is make sure we're joining that back up to the TA agenda. So if this has come, outside of TA, ultimately there's org design, which should be including HR anyway. But at some point, it's then feeding into the actual TA agenda. So if it isn't, because it's siloed and it can be, then we do make sure we're joining that up and connecting all the dots for the business.
Fascinating.
So that talent agenda, it does. We talk about it can feed into the whole of HR org design, comps and bends, TA, even L&D, certainly into the succession planning, so into your business units and so on. So that's we kind of tend to look at it organisational wide.
Yeah. And are you finding, so, you know, what we see in the market now from a TA perspective is that the verticals are becoming more and more defined, you know, so the relationship between marketing and recruitment marketing or employer branding is becoming more of a hard line, you know, that type of setup. Are you finding from a TI perspective that the relationship into other data points or insight teams within the business, is that becoming more of a structured relationship now or not?
Yes, but slowly, I think. And I think there's a lot of, I'm going to say soul searching, but I think that, you know, this kind of where even should it sit? Because actually, I think a lot of TI teams, and they are still relatively small in a lot of businesses, there may even just be one or two heads, they are still very much in TA, and they're kind of often grouped together with sourcing, you know, and therefore are they there to do talent mapping and a bit of analysis, you know, what is their purpose? So I think there is still very much a kind of, where is the place? I think it's absolutely intertwined with TA. I don't think it needs to be part of TA, but they have to be seamless. But actually, TI could point into the business because, you know, it should be involved in M&A, for example, because they're providing the talent data. If you're going to buy this company, it's not just looking at the leadership and is it good, but what about the depth, but what about the market? Can it supply your growth plans? If you are, you know, if they are you're buying something in, I don't know, the Midwest in the US, and they're the only one there, but you've got a 5 times growth plan for them, you need to be thinking about that talent agenda pre-acquisition. So having them sort of buried away as part of TA is not necessary. That's missing a trick. I think it's evolving, but actually quite slowly.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, good. And, you know, again, this is a really interesting place for people to play now in organizations. Is there a particular skill set do you think you need to enter a role within talent intelligence? You know, if I was somebody who's been a 360 recruiter but has an interest in data, is that enough, or do I need to go and search for a degree or something?
Well, I mean, certainly the people in our teams, so we have a specialist insights and talent analytics team, and a lot of those are data scientists of some form. I think more generally, and we are seeing the kind of move and the interest of recruiters moving into this space. I would say an interest in data for sure. I would say passion for data actually would really help, but it's that intellectual curiosity is a must. I mean, because it is that getting to the bottom and the so what. But I think coupling that, you know, that comfort and ease and use of manipulating data, it's the EI, it's the EQ that is needed, because you've got to be able to think enterprise wide. You've got to be able to put this data and see it through the eyes of your stakeholder, and you've got to be able to influence sometimes the findings, because the findings may not be what the business really wants to hear.
Very often.
And then it just gets put on a shelf and forgotten about. But absolutely, but that's where you then suddenly get into this reverse argument of, well, there was no value in it because the business didn't do anything with it. And then all of a sudden you're in this, you know, real danger of, well, it was an experiment. I think we'll pull out, thank you very much, which you do still see. You know, there is movement and growth and retraction in TI teams. So it's that the influencing, the communication skills, which we talk about all the time as being essential in TA anyway. So, but that they are absolutely crucial in a TI role, I would say.
Yeah, and kind of the final question really is, you know, the area we always like to finish on in terms of the skills that people should be developing, right? So I think you might have mentioned it already, but if there's maybe one or two skills that you think somebody who's got a real interest to move into this area of the business, what would those skills look like, or would they be from your side?
Well, I think I probably have touched on it, certainly from the kind of, the competencies, the
Yeah.
personal
Yeah.
skills that you need.
Right.
Obviously, yes, it's the ease of data and working with data, the curiosity and the influencing. I would say for all of us, but especially in TI, it's you've got to wake up to AI. It's
Right.
a whole other podcast, probably,
Right.
and
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
best one to go into that. There will be people at Armstrong Craven that definitely would be, but
Yeah.
I think everybody is going to have to get used to AI in the same way that we now know how to, use anything else digital in our
Yeah.
lives, and that is a whole area of training. Those individuals that are going to get in the front foot of that will be stealing a march on everybody else. But in the same way that you can use PowerPoint, we are all going to have to be able to ask the right question of
Yeah.
Gen AI, and that is going to be a skill that all of us need. But as I said, in TI and in TA, fundamentally, that's going to be the
No,
most crucial
exactly.
thing, I think.
No, I fully agree. I mean, we've invested heavily in our training in the AI space, and we're going to be releasing content in
Mm,
the coming
mm,
months. In fact, it's critical. I mean, it's not a skill set we've got
mm,
within TA right now. It's not, but
mm,
it doesn't mean we can't. So I fully agree with you. Um, Listen, Rachel, it's been an absolute
mm.
pleasure today talking to you, and
Likewise,
love to get you
likewise.
on the show again at some stage. And yeah, thank you again for your time.
Been a pleasure. Thank you. Good to see
All
you.
right,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you. See you. Bye bye.